Hi everyone, I'm Kyana and welcome to Faking the Presses, a podcast where a journalism student from Toronto Metropolitan University talks to established journalists and experts about their work on fake news, disinformation, and online manipulation. On this episode of Faking the Presses, I had the pleasure of speaking with Craig Silverman. Craig is an award-winning journalist and author, an expert on online disinformation, fake news, and digital investigations, and a national reporter for ProPublica. A quick note and thank you to Craig for being my first interviewee for this series and for bearing with my nerves during the interview. We spoke about his 2022 piece for ProPublica called "Infamous Russian Troll Farm Appears to be Source of Anti-Ukraine Propaganda." Here's what Craig had to say. Hi, thank you for joining me today. And first off, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience with fake news and disinformation?
Yeah, so I've been a journalist now for more than 20 years, and a good portion of that time I've spent focused on the kind of core discipline of verification, meaning how do we figure out if something is what it claims to be? Is it true? Is it false? Is it, the image that it appears to be? And that started with me being interested in sort of how journalists do our own work and how we verify information we get from sources or we gather online or from other places. But as social media kind of took off around 2010, 2009, I started to really focus a lot on digital verification and the verification of this content that was on social media, because suddenly there was so many photos, so many claims, so much information spreading that it was a real challenge to kind of sift through it and verify it. It's very easy to manipulate things in our digital environment. And so I've been really interested as a core thing in verification and also in, manipulation and the way people can fake things. And that's ranging everything from, manipulated images to abusive ads or fake websites. And so that's been kind of a beat area and focus for me for a long time. And in particular, starting in about 2014, I did a research project around how online rumors spread and how news organizations are debunking them or not, and spent a lot of time as a reporter at BuzzFeed News digging into, false online narratives, manipulation of the media environment, and what I was calling at the time fake news, but I don't really refer to that anymore because it's a term that's, I think, kind of been taken over by Trump and sort of means different things to different people. So the elements of media manipulation and disinformation are kind of big focuses for me now for quite a long time.
Great. The piece that we'll be discussing today is called "Infamous Russian Troll Farms Appear to be a Source of Anti-Ukraine Propaganda," and that's a piece you worked on for ProPublica. And so can you explain what the general idea of the disinformation of this piece is?
Yeah, so going back to the 2016 election in the US, and actually even before that, there was an article published, I believe it was in Wired magazine, by a writer named Adrian Chen, where he wrote about this business in St. Petersburg, Russia, called the Internet Research Agency that had pretty much full-time internet trolls working at it. And, this was a sort of Kremlin-connected entity. It was kind of a private company, but it was run by an oligarch who's closely aligned with Vladimir Putin. And the people in this agency, it was mostly young internet-savvy people who basically went online, used fake accounts to kind of promote Russia, to attack its enemies, to basically stir up and manipulate online discourse and spread at times, false or misleading narratives, or to take up divisive narratives that might help, in a country, say like Canada, that might help kind of fray the social fabric in a way to undermine, a Western country that Russia and Putin saw as a competitor. And so, that's the IRA had been in existence for a while. And then during the 2016 election in the US, it was later revealed that the IRA really ran kind of an information and disinformation operation where they had lots of accounts pretending to be Americans, where they were, often promoting Donald Trump, or even more so attacking Hillary Clinton, or promoting Bernie Sanders in order to kind of undermine Clinton's bid for the Democratic nomination, trying to play up those divisions and at times amplifying false and misleading narratives. And so, disinformation for me is, false content that is created and spread with the intent and the knowledge of it being false. And so in this case, the IRA absolutely engages in disinformation, where not everything they share is false, but the false things they do amplify, they're doing so knowingly and with malicious intent. And so this story that we published back roughly about a year ago, this was after the full kind of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and some researchers at Clemson University had identified a set of Twitter accounts. And then we also had some related ones that we identified on TikTok and elsewhere that seem to be working in coordination and have some of the technical hallmarks of IRA accounts that these researchers have become very good at identifying. And so the disinformation in this case was really about undermining, Ukraine's point of view and undermining the suffering and war gains of Ukraine against Russia. It was to sow disinformation so that Russian speakers around the world, and particularly in Russia, would start to question anything that said Ukraine was doing well in the war, question the sincerity of Ukrainians, and question, the brutality of the Russian invasion. So it was meant to support really the Russian invasion. There's troops in Ukraine fighting, but there's also, you can imagine, accounts like these who are out there kind of waging the information war as well to push the Kremlin point of view and to undermine sympathy and any of the information that might be kind of seen as pro-Ukrainian in the Russian language internet sphere.
Yeah, I heard a lot about Russian disinformation. It's crazy. So how did you find this story to start off?
This story was definitely a result of kind of a collaboration with those researchers at Clemson University in the US. So I knew them previously, and also the data reporter who worked on it with me, Jeff Cow at ProPublica, he knew them as well. And they kind of reached out to us and they said, hey, we've seen something, we think this might be of interest to you folks. Because, Jeff is very good at the sort of more technical analysis. He's a programmer. And then I have experience also kind of looking at accounts, at social media content, looking for coordinated activity. And then one of the other things that's really important about a story like this is, there is an element of the unknown here that you have to be really careful about in the way you report it and write it. Is we didn't have 100% certainty that these accounts were being operated by the Internet Research Agency. They exhibited a bunch of characteristics that was consistent with previous kind of our IRA networks. They certainly were pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin, Russian language accounts working in coordination, spreading false narratives, undermining, credible information about the war. All of those things were absolutely true and made it interesting. But the Clemson folks said that based on their analysis, they felt that these accounts exhibited characteristics similar with the IRA, but neither they nor us could say with 100% certainty that they were IRA. And one of the interesting quotes, I think, from one of the guys at Clemson in the story is, he says, these are very IRA-like accounts. And if it's not the IRA, then it's maybe even worse, because then who is actually running these? And it's an interesting point, because somebody or some group of people or some entity is out there running a network of accounts, coordinating their messaging, using, very clever, well-structured kind of Russian language messaging to push this kinds of disinformation and propaganda. And if it's not the IRA, then it's an interesting question of like, well, okay, so what other players are in the information landscape in Russia? Could it be another sort of pseudo-Kremlin linked organization? Could it be something directly linked to the Kremlin? Could it be just independent Russians saying we're going to, support our country? And this is where you have to deal with still some of the gray areas. You can do everything you can to identify the network, to show how these accounts were, created around the same time. They tweet some of the exact same material and how they're working in coordination, but you can't always know with 100% certainty who is exactly behind it. And that element of attribution is something you have to be really upfront about with the audience and careful about, so you don't overreach and say, something that you can't actually prove.
Mm-hmm. And you said that there was a risk. So if what is the risk? What could happen to you or the researchers if, you were wrong or you said something wrong?
Yeah, well, I think one risk is just, obviously it completely undermines that work and your other work. If you're going out there reporting on other disinformation, if you point the finger and you get it wrong, then, people are going to say, well, why should we trust you this time? You got it wrong last time. And so there's a really clear and important risk to credibility there. You don't go beyond what you can actually prove. And that's true in this kind of work, but it's true in any kind of work in journalism. And I think another risk is, then basically you can serve the interests of these disinformation and propaganda operators, because if you claim that and you get it wrong and it's ProPublica and it's researchers at Clemson, then they will basically, in many cases, they will make you a part of the next campaign and say, like, see, you can't trust the media, you can't trust these researchers. The media is lying to you, these elites are lying to you, and you end up giving them fodder for future campaigns. And so this is where, reporting on disinformation has to be really careful work, because if you are seeming to debunk or point out disinformation and then you get it wrong, well, then you've just undermined, in a way, the discipline of kind of disinformation reporting as well. So I think the risks are, they're there. And obviously beyond that, if you point the finger at someone or some company or some other entity and you're wrong, you can potentially have, a libel suit on your case, depending on what the topic is and what the accusations are. So I think, the stakes are always high. You always want to get it right. You always want to stay just in line with what you actually know and what you can prove and what you can attribute. But I think one of the things looking back on that period, particularly in late 2016, early 2017 and beyond, there were a lot of news organizations and journalists who suddenly wanted to do reporting on disinformation and fake news and wanted to have stories about, Russian disinformation. And frankly, there was a lot of reporting that, went further than people could actually prove. And I think that undermined some of the reporting and some of the work. And so that's something we always have to be careful about. I think particularly when it comes to, if you are supposed to be fact checking and verifying and debunking disinformation, but you get it wrong, well, obviously, the irony of the hypocrisy of that is pretty strong.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So after you're investigating, you said it was coming from like IRA-like sites. Do you know who was spreading it specifically now, or are you still unsure?
We still don't know. We know that that Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, none of them had their own attribution. We brought the evidence to them. We said, here's some connected accounts. They're working in unison. These researchers say they see similarities to previous kind of IRA accounts. And none of the platforms were willing to sort of do their own attribution, because they can see a lot more than we can. When somebody creates an account on Twitter, Twitter sees, the IP address that they created it from. They can see the email they used to create the account, maybe a phone number and other indicators, a lot more data than we're able to access. And so sometimes doing our kind of journalistic work or academic work, we can get to a certain point and then the platform takes a look and says, oh yes, we are seeing clear links to this or to that. And sometimes they will announce, we see evidence of state-backed actors in this country or that country. But in this case, none of the platforms wanted to make an attribution. They said they didn't really see IRA connections. And so it sits in this kind of unknown zone of, who is this actor who created these connected accounts, who is pushing out this messaging? We don't know now, and we don't know then. Nothing has come to light since.
Oh, you would think that they would. Well, do you know if Twitter and them, they did the work, or did they just say like, no, like, I don't want to check it?
Well, you usually don't get much detail. And this is one of the scenarios where when you bring a bunch of evidence and information to a platform, you're never quite certain exactly how they're going to react and how much information they will share with you. There are times where they will simply say, we remove these accounts for violating our policy, and they won't tell you which policy, and they just remove them and they don't say anything more. There will be times when they say, these accounts did not violate our policy. We don't see an issue here. And then there are other times where, I've brought things to a platform and they've actually been a lot more forthcoming. And sometimes that's, I think the determining factor is, have you brought something that they had, completely no knowledge of, and it makes them look really bad. And so they're going to try to give you more information to show that they have now, tried to shut this down and really dive into it. In this case, we really didn't get much information at all. Twitter sort of referred to these accounts as kind of being a bit spammy, which to be honest, we didn't understand then, and I still don't understand now, because they weren't spammy. They weren't copying and pasting each other's content. They were coming up with original messages, often reusing the same images, but there was clearly effort and craft going into the messaging. And we had some analysts who are Russia specialists and Russian language speakers look at these tweets and these messaging, and they said, some of these are really quite clever. They're quite funny. This isn't a copy pasta operation. And so, there was some disagreement, especially between the researchers and Twitter about this. But Twitter isn't going to kind of open everything up and describe everything they did and tell you everything they looked at. In this case, they just said, we don't see any evidence of IRA. We removed these accounts because, they violated our sort of spam policies, and they left it at that.
Oh. So what those accounts, you mentioned that they're not like bots. They didn't seem like bots. They were very, I guess, somewhat articulate in making content. So what did they gain from that? Like, what do these people gain from spreading this anti-Ukraine propaganda?
Yeah, you're correct. We didn't see evidence of kind of automation here. What we actually saw, for example, we would take the set of accounts and then we could look at the times of day and the frequency with which they were posting. And so in the story, we have a graphic where we show that they were posting pretty much during, what would be work hours in a place like St. Petersburg. Their posting dropped off on a major Russian holiday. And so it really did seem to be humans working in shift work to post to these accounts. And so, that tends to be more effective than just bots. Bots that are automatically just posting the same text over and over, those aren't going to be as convincing, because in order for a fellow human to kind of see a message and interact with it, they want to get the sense that it's coming from a genuine human. And so this is a far more effective propaganda and disinformation strategy, where you have real humans, operating what could be referred to as sock puppet accounts, meaning these were not accounts with their real names and identities on them. They were accounts created with pseudonyms, with kind of funny usernames in some cases. And the goal here is to create the illusion that these are kind of genuine, regular Russian-speaking people just speaking their mind and talking about what's going on in the world. They're trying to create an aura of authenticity and humanity about it, because humans react to humans. And, if you're posting stuff and it's funny, or it's, got a bit of incisive commentary, you're much more likely to get engagement on these platforms than if you're just repeating the same bland thing over and over again. So I think the goal in looking at the messaging and the effort here, it was, definitely to promote the Russian and sort of Putin and Kremlin views of how the war is going, why the war was necessary, why Russia is winning and will win, and why, frankly, Ukrainians are worth invading and killing. It creates a kind of justification for the conflict and for the aggression. And that's important cover to have if you're the government and the military. You want to keep the population on your side. You want to make sure that there is broad support for this, because you do need the public to sort of give a tacit level of support to allow you to continue to prosecute and continue this war.
Right. Yeah, thank you. So I did read the story, and I know one account, like, they took a video of from like somewhere from Austria, like I forgot what it was, but like a promo, and they used it in Ukrainian context. So visual elements like photos and videos, like, how does it make it more convincing to people?
Visual elements are a really, really important element of social media communication overall. The most viral posts, the most viral content, the stuff that gets the most engagement, it tends to be visual. It doesn't tend to be an article or a single text post. It's often an image or a video or that kind of thing. And so, people who do social media marketing know that that's the truth, and people who are doing disinformation and propaganda know that's the truth. And so, yeah, it's not surprising that some of their best engaged posts were often visually oriented. And it's very common that we see in disinformation campaigns where, the case you described, it was, I believe, was an Austrian TV report about a protest where they sort of staged like a die-in, where you had a bunch of people in body bags, talking about, I think it was climate deaths from climate change, if I remember correctly. And so, this video had this man in front of the camera. and he started doing his traditional TV kind of stand-up report, and all of a sudden, one or two of the body bags in back, because it's not really body bags, it's just people doing a demonstration, they sit up, or like the wind blows something away. And so this was taken and used by these Russian language accounts to say that, oh, this was a Ukrainian broadcast here talking about the war dead, and oh, look, see, they're not really dead, it's all fake. I think one line was like, Ukrainian propaganda never sleeps. And so it was used to really sow doubt in the minds in probably a very effective way for these, this Russian language audience, that you can't trust the reports about, the mass killings and deaths in Ukraine. You can't trust those reports. You need to be skeptical. And so it's kind of like turning news literacy and skepticism on its head, of saying, don't believe them, think for yourself. But really, it's using a video that shows something completely different to spread a lie. And that visual element is really core to making that message sink in with people, because they may not remember what the comment was with the video, but they do remember that image of the body bag and the person in it sitting up, and that might stay in their brain for a while.
Yeah, for sure. So that was visual content taken out of context. Do you see that a lot, or do you see kind of manipulated, like photoshopped content, or edited content?
By far the most common type of false or misleading content that we see in the digital environment is what we were just talking about, which is something that is a real piece of content, a real photo, a real video, but it is shifted. Its context is changed and placed in a false or misleading scenario. So, and one of the reasons for that is it's just so easy. It's easy to just take a photo of something, reshare it, and just put a false description around it. You don't need any technical skills or video editing skills. You're taking something that already exists and you're just giving it that false context. And it has the benefit, obviously, of being a real photo or a real video of something that actually did exist. So that is by far the most common. Obviously, it is way easier today to manipulate video or manipulate photos. You don't need a lot of technical expertise, but it does take some effort. And so there's definitely cases of manipulated media being exploited. Actually just today, I saw basically an ad that was kind of on TikTok, where they used kind of deep fake audio technology to make it seem like Joe Rogan on his podcast was endorsing a particular like male testosterone supplement. And he never did, but they took the Joe Rogan segment and they used some software to make it seem like he was actually talking, and it sounded like his voice, endorsing this supplement, and in order to make it seem like they had this really big celebrity endorsement. And so we see that type of manipulation. It's easier, it's getting better and better. You can put words in someone's mouth, you can create an entire scenario that never happened on video that looks relatively realistic. And so this is kind of a new frontier that's happening. But the truth is that it is still extremely effective to just take an image or take a video that exists, to not manipulate it, but just to put it in a false context. It's still by far the thing we're seeing the most.
Mm-hmm. So we just started talking about social media, actually. So how does social media play a role into spreading disinformation or misinformation?
In human societies, we've always had false and misleading information. We've always had governments spreading false and misleading information about, to their population, to other countries. So in that sense, we have a long-standing practice and problem, but social media has changed the game in certain number of ways. One is that because social media is so easy for anyone to kind of sign up and participate, it's kind of democratized the ability for people to spread false and misleading content, whether intentionally or not. And so the ability to participate and do that is so much more widespread. You have way more players on the field in that sense. And then the other part, of course, is that the dynamics with social media networks is that they are, engineered to kind of help make things go viral, to take stuff that people are engaging with and to sort of blow that out so more and more people can see it. And so it has this incredible effect of being an accelerant where false and misleading content can reach so many more people so much more quickly, can jump borders, can jump languages, and it's a much more wide open environment. And so we have kind of these longstanding challenges, but now all of a sudden Anybody can do it. Anybody can also become a node spreading these things unintentionally, and it can reach so many more people so much faster. And I think one of the other parts of it is, the business model is way better as well. There have always been publications that had false and misleading content. There's no question about that, and deliberately put it out there. But today, you can throw up a website. You can make money in other ways with false and misleading content, and that's really what I started documenting in a more systematic way back in 2014. Was I came across a bunch of websites that, if you visited them, they looked like regular news websites. They had news articles, they had bylines, the authors had bios and that kind of thing, but everything was 100% false. And the reason they existed was that you could get huge amounts of traffic to these false stories by sharing them on Facebook. And then when people clicked through and came to your website, you could make tons of money from ads via Google. And so it is just so much easier. You don't need to go out and buy printing presses and all this other stuff. You could just start a website, make up a bunch of stuff, get an ads account, start sharing it on Facebook, run ads to promote it on Facebook, and you could be making a lot of money. And some of these platforms have tried to kind of tamp that down and restrict it a bit, but it is still a possibility. And so that obviously creates a huge amount of interest in people who think they can make money from this and have it be a source of income. That again puts more players on the field.
So I know I just asked you about kind of the bad parts of fake news on social media, but have you seen any, fact checking on social media from people who aren't like fact checkers?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's true that things can cut both ways. You can have social media being an incredible vehicle for spreading false and misleading and harmful information, and you also absolutely have examples of people coming together and gathering information and pushing back against the stuff as well. There has been an explosion in the amount of professional fact checkers around the world. I think there's more than 300 fact checking organizations in the world now. And I remember when it was just a handful. And so, and that has happened because people, recognize that there needs to be a systematic approach to kind of documenting and verifying and debunking stuff out there. And so there's more people doing fact checking than ever before. And it's absolutely true that on social media, you will see folks who are not a journalist or what have you, but who just are able to get the information, will debunk stuff. And that's actually, when I do trainings for journalists, one of the things I always tell them is, if you see a piece of content and you're thinking of researching it or debunking it, make sure you look at the replies and the comments, because someone may have already done the work for you. Somebody out there, again, not a journalist or professional fact checker, will have seen something and decided to kind of throw a link in to check that. And one of the other beautiful things about social media is you have so many people with so much expertise and different areas of expertise that you can have somebody put out a claim about a rocket launch, and all of a sudden you've got somebody from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory weighing in on Twitter saying, well, actually, this is what's really going on there. And so there is tremendous examples of collective knowledge and collective fact checking that take place. But the truth is that the false stuff can spread really, really quickly and get out there and reach more people a lot faster than fact checkers can go to work, because they have to check facts. So by having standards and ethics, they have a disadvantage in that they can't just make something up like somebody can. They have to figure it out and, in some cases, make a lot of phone calls and do other research. So they are often behind the eight ball on it.
Yeah. I do see a lot of like you said, the comments, because that's a good thing you brought it up. I see it all on TikTok and Reddit as well. Just always people going like, here's a link to this, or, here's that. Right. So that's, I've seen both ways too.
Yeah. And some communities have more of a tradition of that. I think Reddit is a good example of a community that takes a bit more responsibility around self-policing, and where you will have people weighing in and offering helpful links and context. It's not the same across every platform. And obviously, Elon Musk is claiming that he's very committed to this kind of community fact-checking feature that they have at Twitter. But his commitment to that is coming at the same time that he has cut back on the amount of kind of investment that Twitter itself is doing in elevating quality information and fact checking and that kind of thing. And so it's an interesting kind of experiment there, where I don't think there's enough people working on the community notes feature right now to scale with the amount of false and misleading content on Twitter. So we'll see how sort of bad that can get before that product is able to scale up and get lots of people participating.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. I'm going to cut my conversation with Craig short because I split our interview into 2 parts. Thank you to Craig for speaking with me in such depth, and you can find his work and fact-checking newsletter linked below. Thank you for listening to this episode of Faking the Presses, and stay tuned for the second part of this interview. Once again, I'm Kyana, and watch out for fake news.